My name is Claire Fayers, and I am a children's writer. I write fantasy stories, and my latest one, Stormhound, has just been shortlisted for the Wales Books Council TNR Nog Award for an English language book with a Welsh setting.
Oh, well done. My name's Clare Potter, and I'm a poet, and I also do lots of workshops in community settings, and I like to collaborate with other artists, musicians, and people who do community art. And recently directed my first documentary, which hopefully I'll talk about later.
So I was born and brought up in Newport in South Wales, which is an area of very high unemployment. It was dominated at the time by the steelworks, which have since closed. I was one of 4 children. My parents were on state benefits, and so we struggled financially always, but that was perfectly normal. I didn't realise that people lived any differently to that, because that was just the way that I and all my friends were then. And the primary school I went to was very good, and I enjoyed it there. Secondary school was a rough one. I'm not sure there were any not rough ones in Newport, really. And this one was set between a cluster of council housing estates, had people there from all the different estates. And I think the general expectation was, if you were a boy, you would go and work in the steelworks. If you were a girl, you might go to the college down the road and learn to type so you could become a secretary. There wasn't that much in the way of aspiration, certainly no thought of you could actually become an author or create things. So I had a few places that I would escape to. The local park was one, which was just up the road from my house, and the other was the library. I was actually very lucky that my mother loved reading, and so we went to the library almost every week when I was a child. And then when I got in my teens, I kept doing that and just found so many different stories I could escape into, which was great. In terms of being Welsh, Newport really wasn't, and still isn't really, a particularly Welsh area. We knew there were people in faraway places in Wales who still spoke Welsh, and we thought that was very quaint and funny. But it was essentially, and it was an English-speaking area. Didn't really feel that I was Welsh at all. Again, it was just my environment that I grew up in, and it was just what it was.
It's quite interesting because, Claire, as far as I could see, Newport was the big city. We'd go there on the bus to buy things for holidays and things like that. So I grew up also in an industrial area, but it was a small minor village called Kevin Forest. And where we lived, our street backed up onto the Black Path, which was the long path that ran down to Britannia Colliery and then up through the village. And I'll probably come back to that a lot in our discussion, because to me, that path was an interesting, energetic place, really, because there were 2 shifts of miners passing one another, and it's like the passing of stories. And because the village was small, everybody knew everybody, so there was lots of gossip, and everybody cared, I think, for everybody, because coal mining was a tough job. I didn't have a real sense of being Welsh. I didn't have an awareness of that, apart from in infant school and juniors, where we sang Daigi Bach or we had a Steddfodau. But what I was aware of was lots of stories and storytelling and singing, and that seemed, I don't know if that was just me in my house, because I lived with my grandfather and my great uncle, and they were both miners, or whether that was just the village in general. The other thing that kind of percolated into me growing up was a sense of freedom. My junior school, my infants, you could see that from the house. The chapel I went to was just down the road, but I could go there on my own for Sunday school, and also to the swings since I'm 6 years old. And when I was in junior school, my teacher, I'd finish my work and she'd send me across the square, the village square, to buy ham and bread. And so instead of being in school, I'd be in Graham's the butcher's in the big fridge with the pigs hanging, the dead pigs. So it was a really interesting and fertile place. And I'd like to read a little bit of a poem that elucidates what it was like growing up in Kevin Forest. It's called Fragments. The chapel squats on the edge of the park where I meet Jesus. I'm flying onto clouds, hands smelling of rust from the swing chain. The crows on the chapel roof make a racket. Mrs. John's dog yelps. He wants me to steal him again. But I'm on the swing and twirling from a spiral. My mother calls 5 times. Everyone else has gone in for tea. My mother is making her way to the street corner. Mrs. John leans on her gate, straining for Mam to tell her I steal her bloody dog. The park is quiet. The chapel lights up. And then the poem continues about a dream I had, because I wrote that when I actually left and I was living in America. And I lived in the States for 10 years, and I was constantly dreaming of Barry Island and my chapel. So more of that to come.
It's great. That's a lovely poem.
Thank
I
you.
love that. It's just, it's got such a sense of place to it.
The place drawing me back always, the dreams I had, yeah. So, moving away, it seemed natural, really. I went to Swansea University, and then I did a degree that took me to Mississippi, and I ended up staying in the deep south. I lived in Louisiana and Mississippi for 10 years. And I wasn't raised Welsh speaking, as I said, but I learned Welsh as GCSE and A-level, and I needed something from home when I went to America. And so I would think in Welsh, and gradually I think I became more and more fluent, although I never used it until I actually met Elizabeth George, Lloyd George's great niece. She'd moved to New Orleans too, so we started a Welsh society. It was lovely to be able to have that exchange of Welsh. I know you and I have talked about this previously to today, that it's a strange thing that when you go away, and a lot of people talk about it, is that you kind of get a renewed sense of your own identity and where you're coming from. And for me to go to New Orleans, look, it's hot, there's lots of jazz, everything's spicy. It's so antithetical to Wales, but it was such a rich culture that it was similar in a way, because the culture I was coming from, we weren't rich, we were the opposite of that, but we were rich in culture. And that's what I found there. And of course it was, racism. And I had to, for the first time, examine my own identity as a white, Welsh, by then, middle class woman. And that was interesting. Not easy, by the way. And it wasn't just a sense of I went to Louisiana and all of a sudden, I'm pining for home and I'm missing home and I'm having the hiraeth. It was more complex than that, because I had to undo all the things I thought I was, in that sense. So the night I left New Orleans, it was after 10 years of living there, it was quite emotional. So I have a short poem on that too. After leading the second line through Julia Street, feeling Pied Piper power, crunching heels on leftover Mardi Gras beads, I danced to the Preservation Hall band with my feathered parasol, undulating bird with diamonds, took tired feet to the carousel bar, drank juleps while it revolved so slow I thought I caught sight of Capote. Born in there, he claimed. Course, everyone wants to be born in the quarter, born, reborn. That's why they all migrate there to hide, blend with thick air, jazz air, blues, tap in air. Because no one asks you where you're from. You just knew. You're someone new there. I went by the bistro where the piano plays itself, though I never believed that until I saw Bogey's girl one night wearing a burgundy hat with a flower trapped in a net. I ran past Terpsichore, Decatur, Piety, Budrips, feeling like Prufrock, feeling like a smoke tendril. And then, in the night, Marsalis played for me, broke me as I sucked down the last chicory coffee, bitter to shed the humid skin I'd learned to live in. Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans? Of course I knew before I left. And so actually now I'm on the other way. I'm missing there, which is like the stone I rub against. I don't know if it's like that for you, Claire, having gone and then returned.
I didn't actually leave Wales for that long. I went to university when I was 18, and I went to Canterbury, and it was a deliberate attempt to get away from home. I hated Newport, wanted to get as far away as I possibly could. I wanted to study English, and pretty much any university would do that. And it happened that Canterbury had a course that I really liked the look of as well, which involved a lot of mythology and folklore, which I've always been interested in. And so I ran away to the other side of England, where it was flat and there were no sheep and the weather was a lot better. And I suddenly realized that I wasn't like anybody else. As soon as I opened my mouth, people were saying, "Oh, what part of Wales do you come from then?" and stuff. And it was partly a Welsh English thing, I think partly a working class, middle class thing. And I think at the time, I think I was just getting on with it and doing the best I could. But looking back, I realized that it was a pretty big culture shock for me, going into a new place and suddenly realizing my differences, which I had never noticed before. And yeah, thinking about it, and this part of the conversation, I actually realized that all of my books have got main characters who have been displaced. My 2 pirate books star a girl called Brown Seaborn who has lost her memory and was found adrift in a boat, and she's got no idea where she's from or where her family is from. Then I moved on to another book which was set on the border of England and Wales in Victorian times, and my heroine has just lost her parents to typhoid. I think it was. My editor just said, "Oh yes, just kill the parents off, get rid of them." So the parents have died, and 12-year-old Ava has got to move across country with her brother to find work to a place she was born in, and then the family left when she was a baby, so she's never known it. And Stormhound, the final one, it starts when the great and mighty Stormhound belonging to Odin, the sky god, crash lands and ends up trapped as a small puppy in Abergavenny, about as displaced as you can possibly get. And he teams up with a girl who has recently moved to Wales from England after her parents divorced. So I really hadn't thought about it before, but this sense of displacement and trying to find somewhere to belong just keeps coming up again and again in anything that I write. So I think that must have been pretty deep in me. And so yeah, I suddenly found out, going to England, that I was Welsh. And so, yeah, coming home, I found a job in Newport in an accountancy office. My fiance, and we recently got engaged, he found a job at Cardiff University. And so we ended up back in South Wales against all expectation, thinking maybe we'd stay a few years and then try and find jobs somewhere else. And 30 years later, we are still here. I think that several things happened while I was back, and we moved out of Newport quite quickly and ended up in Cardiff, which I loved. And Cardiff really is the big city. And yes, growing up, I think I visited once or twice, and that was it. I remember it as being very big and having lots of shops. But I really enjoy living in Cardiff. Then there was once when I accidentally got a book on Welsh history from the library because somebody had put it in the fantasy section and it had a dragon on the cover. And then I thought, given that I had it, I might as well read it. And that suddenly got me interested in Welsh history and language. And by then I was working at the university as well. And if you worked there, you could get a free taster course in Welsh. So I decided to go along and do that, and got on really well with it, surprisingly, and actually loved learning the language. And then, of course, once you start learning the language, you will find yourself getting into the literature and the music and the Welsh community more. There's very definitely, you've got a Welsh-speaking community which has got its own art, its own poetry, its own music. And so you get into that, and of course that makes you feel more Welsh again. And then my first book got published after a long while. Complete and utter fantasy story, no Welsh influence on it whatsoever. And everybody said, "Oh, So how did it affect you growing up and being a Welsh author then? And what are the influences of Wales in your book? And I think there are many, honest. And I found it a little annoying to start off with. But then I started thinking about the Welsh influences that I could put in and all of the Welsh folklore and mythology and legends. And gradually Wales crept into my books until by my fourth book it's in Abergavenny with a lot of Welsh folk tales mixed in. And so, yeah, it was almost, for me, it's not so much a sense of coming home, but discovering the home that was there and I'd never noticed it before. And actually finding a place, which I think has been really good.
I love that that word you used, discovering it. I felt like that when I came back. I think I missed home deeply, and it was very hot, and basically the heat was too much for me, and I felt like I couldn't go outdoors a lot. I had a boat with to go fishing, and that was beautiful to be out fishing, but really the outdoors life was kind of closed to me because it was so hot and there were mosquitoes. So when I came back, it was just this huge kind of embrace of green and hills, because Louisiana, Mississippi, they're quite flat where I was, and the rain and the voices on the buses, and and I thought it was like something tightly knit and like a sweater, and I thought, oh, I just want to put that back on. That's mine. I can reclaim that. But of course, I don't know about you, but when I came back, Claire, I felt like I actually didn't quite fit in anymore because I had changed and I had seen different things, and I was looking for something. I didn't know what it was at the time. But I realized I started actually to fall in love with where I was from for the first time. This village I came from, Cairn Forest, and the surrounding areas, the river and the woods and things like that. And also the people. Now, where I'm from, Cairn Forest, you might have heard of Nathan Cleverly, the boxer. I think we had a famous snooker player from there too. But the most famous story, and it's hugely important to mention this because it's symbolic. Janet Vokes, who was a cleaner and worked in a pub, she bred whippets, she bred pigeons, she'd won with both. And she decided she wanted to raise a winning racehorse. So that where we lived, on the back of those houses, was the old slag heap with an allotment on it. And she, with a syndicate of people, bred Dream Alliance, who went on to win the Welsh Grand National. This is magical. They've made movies about it. There's one coming out quite shortly. But, the symbolism of that kind of slag heap and the fertility on top of it, the ground and everything, I just thought that was, it's just so beautiful, really, that has come out of that place. And do I have time for a poem? I'm not sure what the time's.
Yes, you've got time.
Okay. So I wrote a poem for them, which was published in Kentucky in an Appalachian literature review. So it's quite interesting. It's called Race. The newborn mother had not expected that thoroughbred jolt which fired expectation in her. Possibilities meeting prediction. She delivered her offering to the scent of a good vet, his tools to draw hope out. She would not have foreseen being taken with her long-legged foal to an allotment, to the sounds of chickens, gossip cluckers, the old breeze off the slag heap, classical MP3s, and the subtle chanting of her owners, that this is where owners are bred. Sorry, I messed that up. But this is where winners are bred. Although owners is a nice slip because I want to be re-owned by that community I come from. So, it's special to me, and I feel like I'm re-exploring it all over again through that kind of dream, and it's calling me back. It's lovely. Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about the landscape, didn't we? And for me, I don't tend to write a lot about, the rolling hills and the colours and things like that. But I think it informs me. I don't know about you, Claire, but coming from somewhere that's hilly and we've got these incredible rivers and woodland, and we've got the seaside really close. All that landscape is really kind of fodder for imagination, for stories. But also somebody did some research, I forget what it was, about the Welsh language and how the Welsh language in the north and the south are different because of the difference in the geography. I don't have that to hand, but it's an interesting point that, you know, our accents and the words we use kind of imitate or reflect the kind of the geography, the topography of where we're from. Interestingly, I found myself in Abergavenny a few years ago. I was poet in residence for the Landmark Trust, and there was a medieval house that was being renovated. So I spent a lot of time in this house, just looking at the skirrid and being in this. It's pulsing with, I don't know, something special there. It feels ancient, you know. It feels, and I'm sure you'll talk about myth and things that have grown out of that area. I just want to share a short poem that kind of says everything about landscape for me, which is the landscape between the past and the present. Sorry, the landscape, which is the border, the definition between past and present, and between Welsh and being non-Welsh speaker. It's called diffinio, defining. Parish-shaped maps capture moments in flux. Slippery histories hard to read on today's landscape. Lines in fields erased, boundaries dissolved, this far, no further, meaningless now. A fydd y defaid dal yn aros lle bu ei hen famau'n pori, now that the wall is more blwch than barrier. They'd be free to pass ancient peripheries if they wanted, but this clinging to heft is instinct. Our desire to lay claim to land keeps us penned in, binds us in grass and gair. In the end, though, it's the land that claims us. And I think what that is to me was me trying to sort through belonging. Where do I belong? Because when I went to Abergavenny, that could have been England, that could have been America. That felt so different to where I was coming from. Is that my history? Is that my hill? Is that my language? And then I realized none of it is. You know, the land takes us in, literally takes us back.
I love the Welsh mountains. And I have got a bit in Stormhound where I have a set of evil wizards who are currently posing as teachers in the school because they are looking for the Stormhound. They can cast a spell on the headmaster and make him hypnotise him to believing they're supply teachers from Bangor. Well, they're clearly not. And there's a bit here where Professor Nuffield, who is pretending to be the geography teacher, gets talking about geography. Professor Nuffield drew a final squiggly line on the board, joining at the Welsh coastline, and stood with one hand in his jacket pocket. Of course, any sensible person knows that magic has long since fled to the fringes of our world, along with the old gods and their stories. But some people say the other world, the realm of Annwn, as is known in these parts, lies just out of mortal sight, waiting to be discovered by those who know how to see it. And if the conditions are right, you might stumble into it without even knowing. A girl put up her hand. Sir, what does this have to do with geography? Far more than you'd think, Professor Nuffield said, sitting on the edge of his desk. What is geography, after all? It's the study of the land, and you can't begin to understand the land and its people until you know something of their legends. And that was one of the big themes I had in Stormhound, was the notion that the Welsh land is somehow magical, and it contains just a wealth of stories going back for such a long time. I've actually got Storm, the giant Stormhound, actually lands just at the bottom of Mount Skirrid in a field of sheep. And we've got various theories in the book as to why Mount Skirrid has got its funny shape. And when I go around and do school visits, I will always show the kids this big photograph of Mount Skirrid and get them to come up with ideas as to why why is it like that? And there are quite a few folk tales, usually about the giants fighting or the devil being tricked or something, as to you end up with a big lump taken off the top of the mountain. But it's really interesting. You get a feature of landscape like that, and it almost demands that people tell stories about it. You mentioned that, yeah, the differences in north and south being defined somehow by the landscape, which is really interesting. I think very much that language affects the way that you think about things, that the words you use for things will sort of almost affect your relationship with those things and your feelings towards them, and the different structures. I knew if you're saying in Welsh you have something, it's Mair pethau gyda fi. It's there's something is with me. It's almost like you're slightly nervous of taking complete ownership and saying, "No, that's mine." You say, "Yeah, it's with me," but it feels like you've got a like more sense of, well, it's here at the moment, but I could lose it at some point. And it's a connection between the words that you use and how you see the world, really, and being able to speak more than one language then is just a great gift, because it gives you an entire extra way of viewing the world, which I think is just such a great shame that we lost in Wales. And it is great that people are rediscovering Welsh and wanting to learn it as adults, I think, because it gives you an extra perspective.
And I think also, Claire, is when you were talking about how the land has this kind of energy, this mystery, this sacredness, this demanding stories, these words, they're ancient too, they're landscape of the tongue, I suppose, in a way, if that doesn't sound like too much of a cliche, but is that there's some magic in these words, I think, the Welsh language, carried down so carefully and protected. There's a nerth, there's a power, I think, and a defiance. And it's funny when I read my poems in Welsh, people say, "Oh, you sound so different. You sound much stronger." I need to explore that, I suppose, and bring it into my English word. Interesting. And do you use Welsh language in your stories at all?
I've used a smattering of it in Stormhound. My main character is a girl who's just moved in from London, so she's got no Welsh at all, but obviously we'll go to a Welsh school where they will at least say Bore da at the beginning of assembly and things, so I've dropped in a little. And my publisher is Macmillan's, who's an English publisher, but I thought it would just be nice to put a few little bits of Welsh in, and so just to sneak them into the book. Yes, I mean, my greatest ambition is to have that one translated into Welsh.
That'd be fantastic.
If any Welsh publisher is watching this and would like to translate Stormhound, please get in touch.
Well, I have an interest in, as I said, I learned Welsh as an adult. My children go to Welsh school. But we've talked about this off screen, how it's, in a way, it's been stolen from us. It should have been our birthright. My great grandparents were Welsh speaking farmers, and then all of a sudden I don't have it, you don't have it, and I feel a little cheated about that, and that I feel as well that having not been raised in that culture, that Cymru Cymraeg, those myths, I don't really know much about them, the Mabinogi and things like that, and there's something I'll never be able to quite grasp. I'll never be all in with that, but it does give you a certain amount of freedom as well, that, and I have a poem, I wrote a poem with Llŷr Gwyn Lewis. He's a fantastic Welsh language, first language Welsh poet, and we were put together in a collaboration. We'd never met, and we discovered when we were emailing one another, we were both tutoring in Cardiff Uni, we were actually in the same building, on the same floor, opposite one another. And so we met, and there was this path. We wrote about, the poem is called Cyd Gerdded, and of course in Welsh you've got cerdd as the poem, cerdd is part of music, and cerdd as in walking. So walking, music, and poetry, they're all the same, this movement, and that's going back to, I was talking about the pathway by where I grew. And I just want to pull out a few points of this because he's a North Walian, first language Welsh, brilliant poet. And I thought, oh, he's proper Welsh. He's proper tidy Welsh, and I'm an interloper. And our poem goes back and forth in two voices. But I say that we having a cup of tea and we find common ground in the love of sound and talk of cynghannedd, complex, maze, esoteric for the initiated, for the ear alone. How you seem more Welsh to me, more legit, more proper a poet, a Welsh poet, for you have at your service centuries of political, cultural, historical, all in your tongue, and how you can use words like a lasso to catch the ankles of this Anglo-Welsh barddoness. But of course, as we continued our sgwrs, our talking, and the poem itself, he was saying that, but in some ways I had a freedom, I didn't have the baggage of all that history and the, you know, the cynghannedd and the englyn and things like that. So at the end of the poem, I say, may this then be my suicide note, addo hunanladdiad, where I kill this monoglotted poet, allow the sharp end of Welsh to slit my tongue in two. So that's what I'm trying to do. And since then, I've been quite fortunate that I've started working through the Welsh language. And I feel like it's just so enriched my life. And that first language Welsh speakers, they're really embracing of people like us, second language learners. And that's re-nurtured me as well. That's been another jumper, another cloak, another something that's brought me back home, I think.
I find that interesting, that the notion that Welsh is, split your tongue. It's the thing like of having your two ways of listening, two ways of looking at things.
And I never thought that. I just sound like dragon's tongue.
Yeah, we're fortunate in the way that we can take the bits that speak to us and use them. And
also mixing them up. I feel free because I remember John Gower, who I admire immensely, said to me, just don't worry, just mix it up. You know, if you don't know, and actually sometimes I've written bilingual poems where I know that Welsh writ, but the English and the Welsh sitting together, they do something even newer than just a Welsh or an English. So I feel a lot of, I feel quite grateful and finally embraced by that.
Yeah.
I know we wanted to close with talking about stories, and I began by speaking that I was kind of raised amongst, I mean, who hasn't been? It's not like particular to Kevin Forrest and my life, but it was a really special upbringing with stories and people bringing stories up and down that path. And I don't know how it happened, but I put a pitch in for a documentary. I can't even direct my children, but I managed to get this this role direct in the documentary called The Wall and the Mirror, which you can find on YouTube. And it's a very special project to me. And we have a barber in our village, and she's been cutting hair for almost 70 years now, and in a front room shop. And her father cut hair there before her. And I just want to show you, this is from the film, but you can see in the barber shop, there's Shirley. You can see all the pictures on the wall. This is my boy and my dad. So I got my dad to take my boy for a haircut, and they walked up the path, up the black path, because I thought that was symbolic and important to do a nod to the ancestors, you know, the men who had walked up there. And so when I was making this film, again, this was another coming home. I don't live in Kevin Forrest. I hardly go there anymore. But to sit in Shirley's barber shop, surrounded by those photos that all were kind of speaking and pulsing with stories, and to see the men coming in and the things she remembered, and it was just absolutely beautiful. And a gift to me, really. And the film, actually, it was the people who made the film bust into, and if you watch my document, you'll see some of those comic, like you were saying about Dream Horse, but there is that kind of cheeky, you know, one guy says, oh, I come here for a haircut, I've been coming for 70 years because I fancy Shirley, you know, and things like that. So to me, that's where the story, going back to the source of the stories. And for me, a lot of it's to do with my father, and he walks a lot and writes. And I just had a poem in Poetry Wales. I'm not going to read it. I just want to pull out one or two bits. No, I'm actually not. You can get it. It's Poetry Wales. But it's a poem about trying to catch up with my dad, who walks around these paths. There's the old burial path that goes from Cefn Forest up to the Mynwen, the St. Sannon's cemetery. And it's this sense of walking, being in motion and connected with your stories that I find so rich.
Yeah, I make my living writing stories now, but I have to, I've read for as long as I can remember. I can't remember a time when I couldn't read and I wasn't reading. My mother, apparently she said that one day I was about 3 and I came into the book and said, "Can I read to you?" And then I did. My brother had taught me a few words and I'd worked the rest out. And so I basically grew up with stories and always imagined myself into the stories. I think that the stories, growing up in a fairly confined, big city, we could go about 30 minutes in either direction of our house because we had to walk. But the stories gave me a bigger picture of the world and of different worlds, and showed me that there were other possibilities out there. And I think that was really important to me. And I have recently been doing a lot of research on Welsh stories because I'm writing a book of Welsh folktales for children. And I found several books by Victorian English gentlemen who have travelled to Wales and have just written down the tales people tell. And I've become absolutely fascinated with them because they're just little snippets. They're the opposite of the big legends and epic quests and things that usually find their way into fantasy. You'll have the tale of somebody who had skipped chapel in the morning and the devil popped over a wall and scared him, and so he never missed chapel again. Or a housewife who would always put down bread and milk for the Tylwyth Teg, the fair folk. And yeah, quite a lot of the devil gets outwitted all over Wales. We're obviously pretty good in Wales. We know what we're doing, I think. And yes, old David, who was staggering home from the pub one night and heard singing in the next valley and saw people dancing in a circle, and then they all vanished in front of his eyes. These tiny little snippets, all of them sort of tied into the big stories about the other world and magic and things, and the sense that there is something there that you can accidentally stumble into if you've had one beer too many or whatever. But it's the little tiny stories like that, just stories of personal encounters that people have just become really quite fascinating.
I think my daughter's going to love your Stormhound. I'm going to get it for her.
Oh, great. Oh, do let me know what she thinks. Yeah. I think there's a lot of me. There's more of me in Stormhound than any of my other books, I think.
That's great. It's been really interesting to talk to you because although we come from different parts of Wales and we've had different experiences, and you're a novelist and poet, there's quite a lot of kind of threads.
There's a lot of crossover, yes. I was going to say, just to finish off, if I was going to start writing poetry, what would your advice be?
Follow the song that you can hear. You've talked a lot about, being from a working class environment, and, the thing you've said to me today is about you being little and reading. Go back to that and that joy and just follow some speech patterns. Because I studied poetry to a high level, and I thought, I wasn't a poet then because I thought you had to be academic and clever. And then once I realized I could just relax and just allow my voice and that kind of pattern to enchant me, just be enchanted. You're obviously enchanting and enchanted enough to write novels. You could just do it. Just go, let the language take you.
Okay, thanks. I am sorely tempted to get a notebook out this afternoon now and have a go.
Sorry, I'm not going to write a novel.
No, I don't blame you. They take a long time.
Oh, it's great to speak to you.
Yes, and you. Thanks, Claire.